Oi, meu nome é Isabela. Eu moro em Nova York, mas eu vou para a universidade, faculdade em DC, para George Washington University. E eu cresceu em Manhattan e também em Blumenau, Santa Catarina, Brasil.
All right, so you grew up speaking Portuguese or Brazilian-Portuguese,
Yeah, Brazilian Portuguese. It was my first language.
and do you remember exactly kind of who taught you that?
Who taught me?
Yeah.
Well, when I was a few months old, I was born in the States, but I moved there. So everyone in my family who lives there, they don't speak English. So I just grew up learning Portuguese from mostly like my grandma and my aunts.
And did you speak it with anyone else in your family?
I spoke it with my mom, but yes. And I also have a twin brother, but he was learning the same as me.
And do you still continue to speak it at home?
Yeah, not as much just because it's hard. Because my mom, I don't live with my mom anymore, and there's no one really to speak it at one school in DC.
Mm-hmm.
But I try as much as I can, and every time I go to Brazil, of course, I speak Portuguese.
Mm-hmm. And is your mother from Brazil?
Yeah, she was born and raised in Brazil.
And would you consider yourself bilingual?
Yeah.
And kind of what does that really mean to you to be bilingual?
I think it's a very funny phrase because like sure it's like about linguistics because you're like, oh, bilingual, I speak these two languages,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a lot about culture too because learning a language it's not just learning the words, but it's also learning the foods, it's learning the culture, the customs and everything. So bilingual is more like bicultural, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I speak both languages, but I'm also part of both cultures.
Mm-hmm. And did you? Well, I guess in Portuguese, since they both use the Latin alphabet, but did you ever like grow up reading any like texts in Portuguese?
Yeah, for sure. We have Brazilians are really funny. We love like sharing like memes and just like
Mm-hmm.
jokes. And there's like, I'll tell you this joke, but my mom, there's this, it's really stupid. I can try and translate. My mom always told me this so much fun. It was like, it's like there are two fish, and fish in Portuguese is peixe,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then it's like, and they're in love. What do you call them? It's like apaixonados because to be in love is apaixonado, but apaixonado because like fish. Yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
super. We always like tricks like that and jokes. But yeah, I also went to school in Brazil for some time, so definitely through there. They like in the school, it's not like in the US where it's like 1 year you'll have physics and then 1 year you'll have like this algebra and then the next year you'll have calc. It's all at the same time. So it's more like, okay, so I have chemistry on Monday and Tuesday, and then I have physics on Wednesday and Thursday, and then biology on some other day. So you're kind of learning everything at the same time.
Mm-hmm. And so, did you end up like speaking Portuguese a lot when you were in Brazil with like other people outside of school? Like, did you kind of have a larger social network outside?
Yeah, for sure. We're Brazilians love to be social.
Mm-hmm.
So every Sunday, every afternoon, we'd have coffee or tea, and it's kind of like you see a friend on the street and you just start talking. And if they're with someone, you talk with them too. So it's not like very clicky, like you're just talking to everybody.
Mm-hmm. And do you remember if there were any sort of specific techniques to that were taught to learn or teach you that language?
Um, I think repetition, but also listening. Like in a lot of senses, like you can become language shy, right? But Brazilians like we're very nice people and very friendly and we don't really care. So if you're like embarrassed about speaking Portuguese, as long as you're trying, like Brazilians will love you. They think it's cute, they want to try with you, they really encourage it. So I think the key is just not to be language shy and just like even if you think you're going to be wrong, just to keep talking.
Mm-hmm. And so, I guess kind of adding on to that, did you ever? I think you took a different language as well, just from like knowing you. Do you think that that was kind of the same attitude in your different language?
Yeah, for sure. I took Spanish, which is very
Mm-hmm.
similar to Portuguese. So I wasn't really too language shy, but when I did take French, I remember like the pronunciations were a little foreign to me because it's more like down deeper in your throat,
Mm-hmm.
and Portuguese is very like higher. Um, And so I was a little language shy, but like what I've noticed, like from speaking, like no matter what language you speak, like people are going to try and actively encourage you to speak that. And if you meet someone who isn't trying to do that, then okay, they're just mean. But most people, majority of the time, are gonna try and encourage you. And that's what my mom always said. She speaks 5 languages, and she's learning her sixth language. And she said, Isabella, like just speak it and listen to, like, if you there's music you like, you listen to it. If there's like a podcast, even if you don't think you're going to understand every word, that's okay, because as long as you get the meaning, that's really what communication is about.
Mm-hmm. And because you learn a couple of other languages after Portuguese, did you notice that it was easier or difficult, or kind of how
Yeah.
did it differ from when you first picked up Portuguese?
Definitely easier for sure. There was a lot of stuff that even if the whole word wasn't exactly the same, I understood like half the word maybe, and then based on that, I could connect it. Maybe not with like definitely with romance languages.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I don't know. I haven't tried to learn any other language besides like a romance language, but I feel like maybe that would be difficult because the rules are different. But in romance languages, for the most part, like even just conjugating, like the whole idea of how that works, because you now have a background that has a similar process, like different conjugations, but you're still like, okay, so they has this conjugation, like you has this conjugation, like it just makes everything more easier.
How did you find the conjugations? Did you find it easy to kind of pick up on or difficult?
Yeah. It just honestly at that point, it's the rules are the same for the most part. It's just like the specific letters that are different.
Mm-hmm.
But like when the rules are the same, it's so much easier. Like that, like the adjective comes after the noun, um, instead of before. A lot of people struggle with that, but Portuguese already has that ingrained in language, so it becomes easier. It's really with familiarity, right? Because when you hear something and you're like, oh, that sounds off, right? It makes it harder to formulate sentences. But because the rules are the same in Portuguese and Spanish and French for the most part, right? Some things are different. The familiarity is there, so you just speak.
Mm-hmm. And I guess how would you describe the Portuguese language in general? Because I know that Portuguese, and Brazilian-Portuguese are
Sure.
quite different, at least when you hear it.
Yeah, for sure. So Brazilian Portuguese is more open. I can try and do like a Portuguese accent, and it's like kind of it's kind of funny because they kind of talk with their mouths closed more, and there's more sh sounds in Portugal. But Brazilians also use like a sing-song voice, so we go up and down a lot, up and down, which makes it easier to understand because of those inflections. While like Portuguese, everything kind of is just a little monotone. So like minutes is minutos in Brazilian Portuguese and minutos in Portugal Portuguese. So everything's kind of closed off, and that makes it a little harder to understand. There's a lot of jokes between Brazilians and Portuguese that people we always joke about each other. I can try and give you an example of the difference. So like if I'm gonna say I'm going to the beach today, in Brazilian Portuguese you would say eu vou pra praia hoje. But in Portugal Portuguese, you would say eu vou pra praia hoje. So it's very like you can hear the difference. They also tend to add a lot of verbs, like random verbs. Like I don't know why, but they do. But yeah, Portuguese itself is a very sometimes very nasally because every time I try to teach someone Portuguese, I notice that the main struggle is the nasal sound. So we say like phone, cão, mãe, um, and stuff like that. So that can be really difficult because that's just like not normal for I guess English speakers.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of foreign,
Yeah.
and also, so kind of to add on to that, is there like anything in specific that you enjoy or that you really like about the language, or anything that you actually maybe dislike?
What about the language?
Yeah, or
I like
culture,
how it's
honestly.
very like perky, like a very happy language. Like what every time I hear someone Brazilian, they're very laid back, and I think that's a lot because of the sing song inflection.
Mm-hmm.
But unlike let's say like German, which is like known for being like a very angry language,
Mm-hmm.
you don't really get that with Portuguese, which is why I really like that. What I don't like about it, perhaps I don't know, there's a lot of different accents and like slang depending on where you are within the country or in a different in Portugal or another Portuguese speaking country, and that can kind of make it a little difficult to understand. Also, there's a lot of inappropriate slang that has been like very normalized, whether it has to do like with race or gender, and that can sometimes be like, as an American in the U.S., we're still very like kind of reserved with that. Like we don't really like to make jokes about that or use slang like that. So that is definitely like a cultural difference.
Mm-hmm. And would you say that you're very kind of close to the Brazilian Portuguese culture in general? Like, do you feel
Yeah,
very
for
aligned
sure.
with it?
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a big part. The food, the culture, the people, everything. It's just all in one.
Mm-hmm. And how do you think, I guess, growing up speaking a second language and growing up with a second culture has impacted and kind of or driven your life?
It's definitely it's easy in some ways, but it's also difficult in some ways because you're like, I know this word or I know this phrase in Portuguese, but I can't say it in English, or I know it in English, but I can't say it in Portuguese. Um, and also sometimes like wording, like phrasing is weird because one thing you might understand in Portuguese doesn't directly translate to how it works. In English, for example, like large or big is like size. It's like a descriptor, but it's different in like English. I don't know how I can explain it. Like descriptors are just different. So I remember one time I was like, oh my God, that's so precious. And someone was like, precious? Why did you say precious? Like that just sounds weird. But in Portuguese, you just say like, oh, that's so precious. That's so cute. So sometimes that can have a different meaning or alternative. Yeah.
And do you think it's changed, or not, maybe not changed, but impacted your perspective on life compared to maybe someone that you might know that's monolingual?
Um, yeah, for sure. Because I think also with language comes like perspective of people and different cultures and how they react. So like someone in the US is like, I'm trying to think of like an example of a not a stereotype, something that like Brazilians do that. Oh, in Brazil we're very clean. We like it is like really big. We brush our teeth like 3 times a day. We're always like, keeping ourselves clean. So depending on where you are in the country, it's you people when you go over to their house, they're just like, oh, do you want to take a shower? Like it's not like, and it's not because you smell bad. It's just like we know we like to be clean, so like maybe you want to take a shower. But if you in the US, if someone came over your house and you asked them if they wanted to take a shower, I cannot like imagine how offended they would be. So like with language also comes like culture, right? And so with that it's it's funny. It is what it is.
Has that ever happened to you where you've asked someone to take a shower just out of instinct?
No, because because I know you don't do that in the US. But that's really funny. Also in my town in Brazil, we don't ask people to shower. We do ask if they want to like wash their hands or brush their teeth and stuff like that, but not shower.
Mm-hmm. All right, and I guess before I move on to the image, is there anything that you would kind of mention to anyone who's learning Portuguese? And is there anything that you might want to give as advice or just like some important notes to keep in mind?
Yeah, no. Just keep practicing. A lot of it is repetition, um, and practice. Like if you can find a Brazilian to practice with or someone who speaks Portuguese to practice with, like that's probably the best thing you're gonna do. Also, there's like a bunch of if you want to see videos, there's a bunch of YouTubers online. I really like Luba TV, which is like this guy. He does like vlogs, but he also does like games and stuff like that. It's really cool, and there's like a bunch of stuff. So, but any way you're getting the language is a healthy way. So just like keep at it and don't stop.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And so my final thing would be to just quickly show you the image over here.
Yeah.
So, what would you say is going on in this image?
He's like, see, the ears caught me off guard, right? Because they're very quirky and like large. But then I was like, okay, so it looks like a costume. And then I saw the outfit, and then he's on his computer. So I'm thinking he's like cosplaying or something, or he's like on a online video game thing. I don't know. Or he's going to like a carnival. I don't know. Something like that.
All right. Well, that's pretty much it. And I thank you very much for being here and for sharing your experience growing up with a second language.
Yeah, no,
And
thank you so much.
yeah, of course, no problem. So with that being said, wish you guys and everyone else watching this video an excellent and great rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
どうもありがとうございました。これはコージーのビデオでした。コージーランゲージに subscribe してください。